tablecloth at my parents' 40th anniversary dinner was white linen, ironed flat, the kind my mother only brought out when she wanted people to think our family was something it wasn't. I remember pressing my thumbnail into the edge of the table and counting the centerpieces. 7. One for each round table. My aunt had arranged sunflowers in mason jars, which my mother had complained about because sunflowers were too casual, but she'd smiled at my aunt anyway and said they were lovely. That was how things worked in our family. You smiled, you said lovely, and then later in the kitchen, you said what you actually meant. I was 31 years old that night. I had driven 4 hours from Portland to be there. I had taken Friday off work, which meant rescheduling 2 client meetings and eating the cancellation fee on my hotel reservation because my mother had called at the last minute to say the dinner was moved from Saturday to Friday and, of course you can make it, sweetheart. It's just one day earlier. I was a paralegal, had been for 7 years. I worked at a mid-size firm downtown, handled estate planning cases mostly, which is either ironic or not ironic depending on how you look at it. I made decent money, not great money, but decent. I had a one-bedroom apartment with a leaky bathroom faucet I kept meaning to fix and a savings account I was proud of even though it would have made my brother-in-law laugh. My brother-in-law laughed at a lot of things that weren't funny. His name was Griffin. He had married my sister Willa 3 years earlier in a ceremony that cost my parents $60,000, which I know because my mother told me more than once, with a particular tone that meant she wanted me to understand what love looked like when it was expressed financially. Willa was 35. She had never held a job longer than 14 months. She was beautiful in the way that made people forgive her for things they wouldn't forgive anyone else for. And she had learned that early and used it the way some people use a Swiss Army knife, constantly, casually, for everything. I loved my sister. I want to be clear about that. Love is not the same as like, and it is not the same as trust, and it is not the same as safety. I loved her the way you love a place that hurt you, with a grief that lives in your chest and doesn't have a name. My parents had rented out the back room of a restaurant called Harrington's, which was the nicest place in their town, and the kind of place where the bread comes before you order and nobody mentions the price of anything. There were 40-something guests, extended family. My father's co-workers, retired now, who still called him by his old nickname and clapped him on the shoulder. My mother's book club. The neighbors who had lived next door for 20 years and brought a bottle of wine that my mother immediately put in the kitchen and replaced with something better. I sat next to my cousin Bet, which was a mercy because Bet was the only person in that room who ever looked at me like I was a full-sized human being. The dinner went fine. It went fine in the way that family dinners go fine when everyone has agreed, without saying so out loud to not say the thing. My father gave a speech. My mother cried at the right moment. Willis stood up and said something about love being a choice you make every day, which Griffin filmed on his phone and which 3 people posted to Instagram before the entrees arrived. I ate my salmon. I drank 1 glass of wine. I watched my niece, Willa's daughter, fall asleep against my mother's arm, and I felt something soft move through me that I didn't examine too closely. Then my father stood up again. "Before we do cake," he said, "your mother and I wanted to do something a little different this year." He reached under the table and brought out a box. Gift-wrapped, silver paper, white ribbon. He set it in front of Willa. 40 years is a long time, he said. And we've been thinking about the future, about what we want to leave behind. He looked at Willa. "You've given us a grandchild. You've built a family. We want to help you build something more." Willa opened the box. Inside was an envelope. She opened the envelope. I watched her face go from curious to lit up in the space of 2 seconds. "Dad," she breathed. "It's a down payment," my father said, "for a house, wherever you and Griffin want to put down roots." $40,000. I found out later. $40,000, certified check, right there at the dinner table. The table applauded. Griffin shook my father's hand and then hugged him, which I had never seen Griffin do before. My mother wiped her eyes again. My father looked at me. "We didn't forget you, sweetheart," he said. and his voice had something in it. Not quite apology, not quite justification, but something that lived in between. He reached into his jacket pocket and set a small card on the table in front of me. It was a Visa gift card, the kind you buy at the drugstore in a paper sleeve with a peel-off activation sticker. $50, he said. For a nice dinner out, you work so hard. $50. I picked it up. The paper sleeve had a small bow printed on it. I looked at it for a long moment while the table went slightly, collectively, quiet. Thank you, I said. My voice came out even. I have practiced even for a long time. Willa caught my eye from across the table. She had the grace to look briefly uncomfortable before she looked away. My cousin Bet put her hand on my knee under the table and squeezed once, hard, and didn't let go for a while. I drove home that night instead of staying over like I'd planned. I told my mother I had an early call. She said okay. She hugged me at the door, and her perfume was the same perfume she'd worn my entire life, and I stood in it for a second before I got in my car. I didn't cry on the drive home. I turned on a podcast about true crime and let someone else's story fill up the car. What happened 8 months later was not something I planned for. I don't think you can plan for it. I think some things just find you. And the only question is what you do when they arrive. My firm did pro bono work twice a year for a community legal clinic in Northeast Portland. I'd volunteered there for 4 years. It was the part of my job that felt the most like something. Mostly we helped people with landlord disputes, small claims, benefits paperwork, sometimes wills. A woman came in one Wednesday in February, older, maybe 70s, sharp eyes behind thick glasses, and she needed help understanding a document related to a class action settlement she'd been included in without realizing it. We got to talking. She reminded me of my grandmother who had died 6 years earlier and who had been the only adult in my childhood who told me the truth about things. We spent longer than we needed to on that paperwork. I helped her understand her options. I printed things out in large fonts so she could read them without straining. She came back 2 weeks later, not for legal help. She brought a lemon pound cake and sat across from me and said, "I want to ask you something personal, if that's all right." I said it was all right. "Do you have anyone looking out for you?" she asked. I thought about how to answer that honestly. "I look out for myself," I said. She nodded like that was both the right answer and a sad one. Her name was Harriet Lowe. She'd been a school teacher for 38 years. Her husband had died a decade ago. She had 2 sons who lived in different states and called on birthdays. She had a house she owned outright, a garden, and more money than people assumed when they looked at her, which she told me with the particular satisfaction of someone who had spent a lifetime being underestimated. We became something. Not quite friends, not quite family. She called it Mutual Benefit Society, which made me laugh the first time and made me feel something real the second. I helped her with her estate planning. Proper this time, at the firm. Everything documented correctly. She had no one who understood these things, and I did. What I did not expect was what she told me 8 months into knowing her. She had a trust. She had set it up years ago with a financial advisor she no longer used. The trust had an asset in it, a single asset that she didn't fully understand. Shares in a biotech company her husband had bought in 2003 for what she described as not much. He said it was a gamble. She had never looked at it. She had never sold it. I looked at it. The company had been acquired 18 months earlier. The acquisition had triggered a payout provision in the original shares. Harriet had, sitting in a trust she'd mostly forgotten about, a sum of money that made me sit very still for a long time and then ask her to confirm the account numbers twice. It was $2.3 million. She knew. She had known for a few months, she said. She had been trying to decide what to do with it and not knowing who to trust. Her sons didn't know. No one knew. "Why are you telling me?" I asked. "Because you have not once," she said, "tried to tell me what I should do with anything that belongs to me." She updated her trust. That's not what this story is about. What it's about is what she did after, which was turn to me one afternoon in her kitchen with the pound cake between us and say that she had been thinking about my situation, that she had heard me talk around my family enough times to hear what I wasn't saying. that she had watched me be careful and capable and overlooked, and she was old enough to know that careful and capable people sometimes needed someone to help them see what they'd built. "You've been putting money away," she said. It wasn't a question. "As much as I can," I said. "And you've never touched it." "No." She nodded. "I want you to talk to my financial advisor, the new one. I think you should hear what she has to say about your situation." The financial advisor's name was a name you'd trust. She was thorough. She looked at what I had saved over 7 years, not a lot by some standards, significant by mine, and she also looked at something I'd almost forgotten about, a small inheritance from my grandmother, my mother's mother, which had come to me directly because my grandmother had put my name on the account personally, bypassing the family, which I had understood at the time as an act of quiet love. I had never told my parents the exact amount. The advisor restructured everything, tax-advantaged accounts, a small real estate investment trust. She moved things around with the efficiency of someone rearranging furniture to show you what the room actually looked like. I was not rich, I want to be clear about that. But by the time she was done, I had something I hadn't had before, which was a real picture of where I stood and where I was going. I had paid off my student loans 2 years earlier. I had no debt. I had been buying index funds in small amounts every month since I was 27 because a coworker had mentioned it once and I had written it down. It had added up. What I want to say is, I had been building something without quite realizing it, not because anyone encouraged me, because it was the only thing I knew how to control. My mother called in March to tell me that Willa and Griffin were having trouble. She said it carefully, in the voice she used when she wanted to convey information while maintaining plausible deniability about having shared it. Griffin had made some bad investments. The down payment house they'd put an offer on had fallen through. They were a recessing. She did not ask how I was doing. She called again in April. They needed a short-term loan, just to cover some immediate expenses while Griffin sorted out a business matter. She said my father had already contributed what he could, and they were trying not to pull from retirement. "We were hoping," she said carefully, "that you might be in a position to help." I was quiet for a moment. "How much?" I asked. 20,000. $20,000, 400 times the gift card. I noticed that. I didn't say it. "I'm not in a position to do that," I said. There was a pause. "We're not asking you to give it. It would be a loan." "I understand. I'm still not in a position." Another pause, longer. "You've never been generous," my mother said. Her voice was not unkind exactly. It was the kind of not unkind that's worse than unkind. I said I was sorry to hear they were struggling. I said I hoped Griffin got things sorted. I said goodbye. I sat with the phone in my lap for a long time after that. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was what had happened the previous October. My firm had handled an estate for a client who owned a commercial property in a part of Portland that was now, due to a rezoning decision and a great deal of developer interest, worth considerably more than when he bought it. The estate was a complicated one, contested by multiple parties, and it had gone on for 2 years. I had worked on it longer than any other single case in my career. When it settled, the lead attorney had included in the fee structure something I had not expected, a percentage-based bonus for junior staff who had contributed significantly to the outcome. My name was on the list. The bonus was not a small number. I didn't tell anyone. I moved the money. I called Harriet's advisor. I did everything right. And then I waited, because I had learned by then that patience was not the same as passivity. Patience was a form of preparation. I had watched my family for 31 years. I understood how they moved. I understood what they wanted and how they asked for it and what they did when they didn't get it. I was not angry anymore, or not only angry. I was clear. There is a difference. What I had not planned for was my father's health. He had a heart event in June, not a full heart attack, the doctors said, but a warning, significant blockage. He needed a procedure. He was going to be fine, or fine enough, but the medical bills were not small and his insurance had a high deductible because he'd chosen the cheaper plan after retiring to save money. which was a decision my mother had agreed with at the time and was now not discussing. I drove down. I stayed for a week. I slept on their couch and brought food and sat with my father in the evenings when he was tired and watched the game shows he liked. He was quieter than usual. The procedure had done something to him, not physically, or not only physically, or not only physically. He seemed to be reckoning with something. I didn't ask what. On the last night before I drove back, he found me in the kitchen. "I wasn't fair to you," he said. I looked at him. He was wearing the old cardigan he'd had since I was a teenager, the one with the fraying cuff he'd never let my mother throw away. "At the dinner," he said. He stopped. "I thought you were okay. I always thought you were okay because you never made a fuss." "I know," I said. "That was lazy of me." I nodded. I didn't tell him it was okay, because it wasn't, but I also didn't want to hurt a man in a fraying cardigan who had just had something go wrong in his chest. "I appreciate you saying it," I said instead. He nodded. He went back to his chair. We watched Jeopardy and neither of us said anything else about it. Willa called me the next morning before I left. Her voice was different from how it usually was. Thinner. "I know what Mom asked you," she said. "The loan." "Okay," I said. "Griffin is... It's bad. It's really bad." She exhaled. "He got involved in something he shouldn't have. There are people he owes money to. Not like regular people." I was quiet. "I'm scared," she said. It was the most honest thing I had heard her say in years, maybe ever. I felt it land somewhere real. "Have you talked to anyone?" I asked. "A lawyer?" "We can't afford." "There are resources," I said. "Let me look into it. I'm not making promises, but let me look." I did look. I spent 2 evenings researching and made some calls. I had a colleague whose husband worked in financial crimes defense. I gave Willa his name. I told her what questions to ask. I did not give her money. I gave her what I actually had, which was knowledge, and I had learned from years of watching people in trouble that knowledge was usually more valuable anyway. What happened next with Griffin is not entirely my story to tell. What I will say is that there were consequences, and some of those consequences he brought on himself, and some of them my sister had to share even though they weren't hers, and it was ugly in the specific way that things are ugly when they've been coming for a long time. What happened after that, which is my story, began in September. My parents called together. That meant speakerphone, which they only did for things they considered important announcements. My father's medical bills had added up to more than the insurance covered. They had depleted most of their liquid savings over the past year between the bills, the money they had continued to give Willa, and some repairs to the house that couldn't be deferred. They were not destitute. They owned the house, they had retirement accounts, but they were frightened, and frightened people reach in the direction of what they think might save them. "We need to be honest with you," my mother said, "about our situation." I listened. "We've given a lot over the years," she said. "To both of you, we've tried to be fair." I did not say what I was thinking. "We're wondering if you're in a position to help, more significantly than before. We know you asked us not to ask again, but the circumstances are different." My father said nothing. I could hear him breathing. "I want to ask you something first," I said. "Of course," my mother said. "At the anniversary dinner? The gift card?" Silence. "I need to hear you say you understand what that was." A long pause. My mother said, "We didn't think." "I'm not asking what you thought. I'm asking if you understand what it communicated." My father's voice, quiet, "Yes." My mother didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Yes, I think we do." "Okay," I said. "I need a week." I called Harriet's financial advisor. I looked at everything. My accounts, my projections, what I could do without, and what I couldn't. I thought about what I wanted my life to look like. I thought about my father in the cardigan. I thought about Bet's hand on my knee. I came up with a number and a structure. I called my parents back. I told them I would help. I would pay the outstanding medical bills directly, to the hospital, not to them. I would set up a monthly transfer for living expenses that would cover what they actually needed without covering what they wanted. I retained the right to review and adjust the arrangement once a year. This is not a loan, I said. I'm not asking for it back, but it comes with conditions. Conditions? My mother said. You don't ask me for anything beyond what I've described. You don't direct money to Willa through me. You don't make me feel guilty for having resources you didn't know about. I paused. And you don't ever, at any family event in front of anyone, communicate to me or to anyone else that I am worth less than my sister. There was a long silence. Okay, my father said. My mother said we never meant. I know, I said. I know you didn't mean it that way, but it happened that way and this is the condition. They agreed. I hung up and sat in my apartment with the last of the evening light coming through the window and thought about how strange it felt to have said all of that out loud and still be here. Intact. Breathing. I had expected it to feel like power. It didn't feel like power. It felt like finally being in a room where the windows were the right size for the wall. Harriet died the following January. It was not unexpected. She had told me in December that she was declining and that she was at peace with it, which I believed because she was not a person who said things she didn't mean. She left me something, not the bulk of her estate, which went to various causes she had spent her life caring about, but something she had specifically designated in the updated trust, in a line that her attorney read to me, for the Mutual Benefit Society, so she keeps going. It was enough to change the trajectory of something, not everything. I'm not telling you a story about sudden wealth, because that's not what this is. I'm telling you a story about the other kind, the accumulation kind, the kind that happens when you pay attention and don't flinch and keep putting one thing after another in the right place over years, while everyone around you assumes you are simply managing. I bought a condo in the spring, small, in a neighborhood I loved, with a second bedroom I converted to an office. I fixed my own leaky faucet finally, and there was something satisfying about that specifically, about the tool in my hand and the drip stopping. My sister called me in March, not about money. She called to tell me she had left Griffin. She was staying with a friend. She had finally, she said, talked to a therapist, and the therapist had said some things that landed. I've been awful to you, she said. Sometimes, I said. For a long time. Yes. I don't know how to. She stopped. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything perfect, I said. You could just not do it anymore. She laughed a little, watery. That's it. That's a pretty significant it, I said. We're not close, my sister and I. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way people sometimes imagine reconciliation happening, all warmth and recovered ground. But we talk now in a way that is real. She asks how I'm doing and waits for the actual answer. That is something. That is, actually, a lot. My parents came to see the condo in April. My mother walked through each room slowly, touching the door frames. My father looked at the view from the office window for a long time without saying anything. At dinner, I cooked the same rosemary chicken I had been making since I was 22. My mother said, "You did all of this." Yes, I said. By yourself. With some help from people who believed in me, I said. She didn't respond immediately. Then, I should have been one of those people. I looked at my mother across the table. In her same earrings she'd worn to every important dinner for 30 years. And I saw something in her face that I recognized because I had felt it myself. The specific grief of understanding something too late and having to decide what to do with that knowledge. You can be one now, I said. It's not too late for that. She nodded. She didn't say lovely. She just nodded and looked at her plate and then back at me, and that was real, and real was enough. I cleared the dishes. The city was dark outside the kitchen window, lit up in the particular way cities are at night. Not beautiful exactly, but full and present and mine. I had been quiet for 31 years. People had mistaken my quiet for emptiness, for smallness, for a life that didn't require much tending. They had been wrong about that in a way I no longer needed them to understand. The debts I was owed were not ones I tried to collect. What I had built instead, carefully, invisibly, in the years when no one was watching, was the only answer that mattered, and it was mine in a way that no check at a dinner table in silver paper with a white ribbon could ever have been. The $50 gift card is still in a drawer somewhere. I never threw it away, and I thought about why. I think it's because it was honest in a way the rest of that dinner wasn't. It said exactly what my family believed about me, that I was manageable, that I didn't require much, that my life was a smaller thing than my sister's and could be acknowledged with something you pick up at the register on the way out. What they didn't know was that I had been paying attention to everything, not out of bitterness, though there was some of that too, out of something quieter, a decision, made somewhere in my mid-20s, that I would not wait for anyone to hand me the life I wanted, that if I was going to be invisible, I was going to use that invisibility well. I think about Harriet a lot. She was a woman who had been underestimated so consistently and for so long that she had turned it into a kind of freedom. Nobody was watching what she built, so she just built it. She told me once that the most dangerous thing you can do is let someone else's opinion of your ceiling become your actual ceiling. She didn't say it like a quote on a coffee mug. She said it the way you say something you figured out the hard way, over decades, and are now stating as plain fact. What I'd built without anyone noticing, wasn't luck. It was the result of doing the boring things consistently when nobody was rewarding me for them, paying off debt before I bought anything nice, putting money away in accounts nobody knew about, saying no to things that felt good in the moment but cost me in the direction I was trying to move. None of it was dramatic. None of it made a good story at a dinner table. But it accumulated, the way quiet things do, into something real. The harder thing, the thing I'm still working on, was the integrity part. Not the big dramatic kind, but the daily kind. Deciding to help my parents even after what they did. Deciding to give my sister a phone number instead of a lecture. Those choices cost me something, and I made them anyway, not because I owed anyone anything, but because I wanted to be someone who made them. There's a version of this story where I walked away clean and let everyone figure it out. That version would have been easier. I don't think it would have been right. And the resilience, the staying in the room when the room was uncomfortable, the driving 4 hours and sleeping on the couch and watching game shows with a man who had diminished me without meaning to, that wasn't forgiveness exactly. It was a choice to remain a full person in a situation that had historically made me feel like half of one. That is its own kind of strength, and it doesn't get named as often as it should. I am not the daughter they expected me to be. I am something they didn't plan for, and I say that without bitterness now. They planned for Willa. They assumed me. The difference between those two things gave me more room than they realized, and I used every inch of it. The condo is quiet in the mornings. I make coffee. I look out the window at a city that doesn't know my name yet, and I feel something that took me a long time to recognize as ordinary contentment. Not triumph, not relief, just the steady feeling of being exactly where you put yourself on purpose over time. That is enough. It turns out that was always going to be enough.